Hello, my name's Earl Imes, and I'm curator with the North Carolina Museum of History of African American Agriculture and Community History. And I'm here, the pleasure today, to speak with Dr. Evelyn Scales Thompson of Mount Airy, North Carolina, for our 20th annual African American Cultural Celebration. But before we begin, we want to note that we are observed COVID guidelines by masking and social distance. So since we are social distance at your request, and if we can unmask and stay socially distant, I think we may get a little better audio feed. Well, great. Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be with you, Dr. Thompson. And again, your presentation, From Slavery to Freedom in Surry County, North Carolina, I just cannot wait to hear and see your artifacts and documents and photographs and the story that you have to tell of the Scales family. So without further ado, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your project and how you got into genealogy and your historical research?
Certainly will. Thank you, Mr. Imes. I came to the focus of family and the history of my parents. You might say accidentally. I cannot tell you why the interest, except after my father passed.
And what year was that?
It was 1970.
1970?
Yeah, 1977.
77?
77.
And what's your father's name?
Joseph, he was Elder Joseph Henry Scales.
Okay.
And after he passed, I never thought about, or we never had in school, to write about your parents or tell anything about your background or anything like that. And I was working in Maryland as a teacher. And after my father passed, for some reason, it just haunted me that I didn't ask him questions, that I did not know his father. I was not born when his father passed, or his mother. And I never asked questions. But he had pictures of his mother and his father on the wall. And that haunted me. And so I asked a librarian in Montgomery County, Maryland, if she would do some research on his father in Virginia.
And this was in the late 1970s?
That was in the late 1970s.
Okay.
Right. And she did. And that got me interested when she showed me some of the documents, and she told me about all the family, all the children, and what he did. And so it just caught on, and I started looking up information about my father particularly, and then of course you find out more about your mother as well. So that went as far as taking the DNA, and when in Washington, D.C., there was a company, a group of people who would take your DNA and trace it. And they traced mine to Ghana, and my father. And then I got the information back from them that my mother's background was from Cameroon, and my father's was from Ghana.
Very good.
And so that really pushed me forward to begin to find more. I mean, that was just
kind of a spark plug.
Yes, it was. And so I did what I could do from the Virginia records and started getting the census records and anything else that they had in Virginia. I dreamed of seeing Ghana and wanted to go to Africa. It was just a desire, and I didn't know how I was going to get there or who would go with me. And it just so happened it's just been 2 years ago. I joined a church I attended the church in Durham, and the pastor of the church was Ghanaian, and he had a trip going back to Ghana, and I just thought, this is just unreal. It's like a dream.
Serendipitous.
Yes, indeed. And so I said, whatever it takes, I must go to Ghana. And so I took that trip, and it is still, the pictures, the trip there, and being there, it's still very vivid. And what excited me more about coming back and telling people here was a spark. There are many people in Mount Airy who would love to go to Africa. They would now want to see where they came from and go to that place, go back to see Africa.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful research journey. So you began your academic genealogical research around 1977, and paper trails through libraries and archives before the internet,
Yes.
all the way up through the turn of the 21st century. And in 2010, you were in Washington, D.C. and had the opportunity to take this DNA, which revealed what actual part of the continent of Africa, which is really interesting because from a historical point here in North Carolina, a good segment of our population of people who were brought from Africa and enslaved here were from Ghana and Cameroon to a lesser degree. But the folks in Ghana were farmers and were brought here to farm like they were already in the continent, and the folks in Cameroon were herdsmen and were brought here to do the same, to herd cattle and sheep and goats. And so we had a conversation off camera about some of your mother's relatives, and you were sharing with me that here in, is it North Carolina or Virginia, they were
North Carolina.
in North Carolina, they had cattle, and can you share some of that?
Yeah. Well, in my mother's family came from Rockford area in North Carolina.
In Surrey
Surrey
County.
County.
On the corner of Surrey and Yakin.
Yes.
To be sure.
Surrey,
Yes. Yes.
And of course, her grandfather was born on this plantation and slavery.
Here on this land in Surrey County.
Not on this land, in Yadkin County.
Oh, in Yakin, what the
He
Yakin
was
County
adopted,
actually.
yeah.
Yes. Okay. So for our audience to be clear, Yadkin County was formed from Surrey County in 1849. So essentially, we're talking about, as we
big
mentioned,
territory.
next door where Rockford is actually used to be the county seat of Surrey before Yakin was formed. So,
Yeah.
so for our viewers, we want to make sure that we're informing
Yes,
them that we're talking
exactly.
about the same geographic place.
Exactly.
But yes, ma'am, continue.
So-
Yes.
Yes, so her her father, her grandfather, was born in as a slave, but he was the son of the slave owner, and his mother was Indian, a Cherokee.
Now, do you know who that slaveholder was?
They were Dobsons.
Dobsons. Okay, so your genealogy research revealed the white slaveholders were Dobsons here in Surrey County to your ancestors who were originally from Cameroon.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes. Well, I would imagine that you may have plans and desires to go to Cameroon also.
Yeah, it would be wonderful, and it was so close. I was
Yeah.
there. It's just I was with the tour. If I'd been on my own or with a group that we could just travel, probably would have gone on to Cameroon. But it was a planned trip to Ghana. But Cameroon is not that far.
Yes.
It appeared on the map. As we get back to Mount Airy, you might say my mother's father, born in Surrey County. The interesting thing about him was that they lived on the river, they worked on the river, and in the river, I understand from the history, there was iron ore.
This is
They
the
took
Yakin River.
In Yakin River.
Yes.
They took the iron ore, they worked the iron ore. And it was her grandfather that hauled the iron ore to Raleigh to build that fence around the Capitol.
Wow.
And,
Wow. Now, what was his name?
James
James
Jim
Dobson.
Dobson.
Okay, so we've spoken so much about your mother, we haven't even said her name.
Emma, that's right. Emma Caroline Josephine Dobson.
Emma Caroline Josephine Dobson.
Yes, was her name, and then she married a Scales.
And Meredith Scales.
And my father's name was Joseph Henry Scales.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how long were they married?
50 years.
Wow.
And they celebrated their 50th anniversary of that picture over there.
Oh, wow, okay. Well, and talking about your mother's line and from Cameroon and the Dobson, if we can pivot a little bit to your Ghanaian ancestors who are your paternal line, is that correct? Your Scales line?
Yes.
And so just remind us again your father's name and and you mentioned his father, but maybe if you have more names and stories to share.
Well, I only have I don't remember his father's name. My father's name, because I didn't know his father when he had passed when I was born, and right now I'm blank on his name.
So you are the 10th child, or the 9th?
I'm one of the 13.
One of 13.
I have a twin brother.
Twin brother, and
So
what number are you and your
we're
twin
13.
brother?
Well, I'm 12 and he's 13.
12 and 13. So you're the last. You and he are the last.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that's understandable because I think a lot of people who don't have 10
Yeah.
and 12 children these days maybe can't understand how they don't know their grandparents when
Yeah.
in essence your father was maybe how old when you were born?
And they were in their 40s.
Okay.
You know, in
And
their
so
40s. But let me correct that. I have a younger brother.
Okay.
So that was one more
Okay.
afterwards.
Okay.
They had 13 children,
Okay.
and 3 of them died as infants, but they were before the last 3 were born.
Okay.
And then they had 3 more.
And so your father, what was his occupation? His primary?
My father was a minister.
Okay.
He ministered the local church of State Line Primitive Baptist Church, but he was a self-taught carpenter, brick mason, rock layer. He taught himself how to do those things. As a matter of fact, when they got married, they both were from this area. My father was moved from Virginia with his family to North Carolina, and my mother's family lived up the road there in North Carolina. They walked to Surrey County.
Okay.
So that tells you how
Right.
close they were
Right.
when his father moved to Surrey County. So his father became the first pastor of the church in this community.
Of the Primitive Baptist
Of
Church?
Primitive Baptist Church in,
Okay.
in this community. So that brought my mother and my father together. And my mother lived on the land. Her grandfather gave the land to build the church on. And
The Dobson?
The Dobsons.
Okay.
Gave,
Okay.
The Dysons. Her grandfather was a Dyson.
Okay.
And so it was her mother's
Father?
father,
Who's a Dyson?
who was a
Okay.
Dyson, that gave the land to build the church.
Okay. Okay.
And then my father's father became the first minister.
So it sounds like we around the time frame 1900, 1910 time frame when they came down and established that church?
Yes, it must have been her.
Okay.
Probably around in that area. When my parents were brought together in that way, in the building of the church, and the father becoming the minister, and so they met and they married, and then her parents gave them land. Again, the Dyson family, who owned land from the city to the city limit to the Virginia line. He owned a lot of land. So he gave his daughter and her husband the land, several acres, and this was part of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is now your family homestead?
Now it's my
just
family.
outside of Mount Airy?
Yes.
Here in North Carolina,
Acreage
Surrey
outside.
County, yes.
Yes.
And I was admiring the home that your father built right next door to your home. That the brickwork, well, the masonry, I should say, is outstanding. And I was looking at it. So for you to bring that up is a really telling point.
Yeah.
And I would hope that we could get some pictures so that folks can see that skill and artisanship of someone who was self-taught.
Self-taught.
Yes.
And being self-taught, he practiced his skills to his advantage wherever he needed to do. That was one of the reasons he put the rock around the house. It was first his skills, and then he thought it would be there. He wouldn't have to maintain or do anything more to it.
Well, he's spot on. You know, he's spot on. These foothills can sometimes experience flash floods
That's right.
and draining into that Yadkin River. You know, it flows all the way to Georgetown, South Carolina. So, so he was spot on, and really, not only for the practical purpose, but the aesthetics of it is really pleasing when you pull into your homestead. It really is nice.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. We have grown to appreciate them. That I'm sure most people realize that as the years go by, it didn't mean very much because we had to work. We had to bring those rocks from the fields and from all the area all around. So it wasn't until later on you begin to really appreciate the genius of my father and my mother and what they had to do. And I just hope that young people live long enough to really appreciate their parents and what they have done in their time to carry on the culture. And now this house, my parents, when they passed, none of us lived here. All of the children had left Mount Airy.
Really, and the house was abandoned.
The house was empty.
Wow.
And because we couldn't find work. We didn't
Here in North Carolina.
North Carolina, the work that we wanted to do. Now I could have stayed. I'm a teacher. I could have stayed, but Mount Airy didn't offer a lot in terms of growth.
Nothing like it does today.
No, nothing like it does today. That's true.
Well, I can say the idea of your story inspiring young people to ask those questions of their elders, but at the same time to cherish those memories and those stories, like you just said. I'm sure that you didn't think it was much of a memory when y'all were hauling those rocks from all over. But it must have been a real sight to have 13 children all working in tandem.
Well, it wasn't. It really wasn't 13 all at once. It was the younger ones. Because
the younger
older ones. Yes.
Okay.
By that time, the older ones. My oldest sister's old enough to be my mother.
Oh, okay.
So she had married and had moved to Roanoke, Virginia, and the next sister had married, and they moved to Harrisburg,
Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, yes. And the son stayed, and he grew up with us. So it was a nephew that my mother and father accepted. So it was the younger ones that my I guess 3 brothers on the end, myself and my nephew, all.
So a good half dozen hands.
Yes.
To go in there.
Yes,
Yeah.
he put everybody to work.
Still a gracious man. Must have been a sight, and I'm sure you didn't think much of it hauling rocks back then.
Yes. But I just want to acknowledge the way my parents, my father, particularly my mother being the housewife, she stayed home and of course had children. She never worked outside of the home. And to think about that today, and then to own your own home and have land, and it's something that I have really thought about a great deal. But my father, in starting his family, worked in the coal mines. He went to West Virginia.
Okay.
And then as my mother had children, had babies, he realized that he needed to be home. So he came home. And he farmed a little bit.
What did he farm?
He played tobacco was the big thing,
Okay.
So he and another family joined, and the children, and raised tobacco for a while.
Do you know what type of tobacco? Was it bright leaf, burley? Do you know?
I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know the tobaccos, but that lasted a little while, and I was very, very young. Part of this is the story that's told to me because I don't remember.
So we're talking maybe 1940s time frame when he's farming tobacco.
Early, yeah. It would have been
earlier than that even?
40. It was in the
Early
early
40s,
40s.
okay.
Yes. And so after farming a little, he even was a mail order man. He would order suits and shoes and items for people in the community.
Okay.
And then he decided he would teach himself how to lay brick. And so he practiced. And then the white families hired him to build walls. He had some walls or laid brick someplace else. He never did a whole house early. But he picked the skill up, and from there developed a career for himself of laying rock and brick. And when I think about it, my sister and I often talk about how brilliant he was too.
Must be brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, that and the determination
Yes.
to do that.
And the fact that he made the decision to be home with his family. He had to make a living, but could not stay with the coal mines, away from his family, and he found a way. And we often talk about that through faith, what's possible.
Oh, that is, and I'm sure, his goal and idea, when you bring up having a home that's mortgage free and a mother and a wife who can stay at home, and some people might not necessarily like that, but for child rearing, it's the optimal thing if one of the parents at least could stay at home, and back in those days it usually was the wife who stayed at home. So your mother birthed 13
That's right.
children and
That's right.
and
She needed a lot of help.
yeah, and so, but you and your siblings couldn't get a better education than from your mother and father. I mean, and with school education you received just augmented that. What were some of the schools that you attended here in Surrey County?
Well, there was only one school in Surrey County that we could attend, and it was called first it was called the Ararat School. Ararat School for colored children. And then the J.J. Jones School was built from the Jones family, and K through 12. And none of my earliest siblings attended that school. So it was in the 30s, 1929, 28 or 29. No, it was in the 30s that school was built.
So it sounds like it was likely a Rosenwald school?
That one wasn't, no. It
Okay.
wasn't Rosenwald School. And I don't, that's interesting because I have a friend who's looking up the Rosenwald schools, and I'm not sure that the older building was a Rosenwald school there. But anyway, the present Jones School was built K through 12 back there. And I was too young to attend it when it was built. And that's where I attended school K through 12.
Is that school building still standing?
The school building is still standing and still being used as a facility. The rooms lease out for different things.
Very good.
And the history of the gymnasium, we did all of the extracurricular activity outside, and the masonry class helped taught the students and the community, and they built the gymnasium that is still there and being used and is owned, you might say, by the Jones alumni.
Okay. That's still active.
Still active.
Well, we might want to take a little break. I would like to have a look at some of your artifacts and documents and photos if you would share some of them with us.
All right.
All right.
I'd love to. All right, this is Robert and Amanda Dyson, who lived in Mount Airy. Robert's family came out of Virginia. I learned in some of my research, came around to the part of North Carolina, and then on up into Mount Airy. And during his life in Mount Airy, Robert owned a great deal of land. And the family story is that his mother, whom I don't have a picture of, told him as far as he could ride his horse, she would give him land. And of course, in those days, it was all wooded area, all wooded land, and probably not owned specifically. But she told him that she would give him land. So he had acres and acres of land north of the city of Mount Airy. As a matter of fact, it joined the Virginia line. And on that land, right south of the Virginia line, a church was built. He gave land to the church, to the people, the community, to build their church. And so they built their first church on there. Then he gave land to the African American community for the school. And that was a little farther south of the line. And so he was very prominent, and family members in this area built homes on land that he owned. And many family members are still on lands from 5 miles apart in this area. So he was a very interesting fellow. And the other very interesting thing about my great-grandfather is that he had many families. He was married to Amanda, but the story goes that he needed children to work his farms. So he had children by different families. And so we had to be very careful when we were growing up, my brothers particularly, of the girls they were interested in, because they didn't know everybody and they didn't quite know who they were related to. But that's the story of Robert. He was a very, 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 very respected man. And I must add, the stories that many people told that he took care of all of his families. And they were all proud people. And this was his wife, who also, you might tell, has Cherokee Indian blood. This is a picture of James and Martha Dobson. And Martha was the daughter of Bob Dyson, who owned many, many acres of land in Mount Airy. And Jim was the son of the Dobson family in Yadkin, in Surrey County at that time, the big Dobson family. And they made their home in Mount Airy, where Martha's family gave them the land to build a home. It was all wooded, and wagon trail, but they built eventually from a log cabin to a 2-story house, and raised their family. And her son stayed in the home and raised his family, and then his son owns the home today. The home is empty, but it's down through the third generations that they own today. Martha and Jim, my mother is the daughter of Martha and Jim, and they gave their children who married and lived in Mount Airy, they gave them land. And the land that my mother and father, the 6.5 acres that they have, was given to them by Martha and Jim. And of course, now there are 2 children, grandchildren, that live on the land, great-grandchildren, and a great-grandchild now lives on the land. So the land is being lived on by generation to generation in Mount Airy. Martha was a midwife. Of course, they farmed at the time, but Martha was a midwife and delivered many babies, white and black, in Mount Airy. And she delivered all of my mother's 13 children. She was very fortunate to have a person very caring to be nearby to help her deliver the children, including twins.